All right, hey Andy, I know you sent me a message on Facebook and I didn't reply. I'm sorry. I just wanted to give you a proper response rather than just a quick text description. So here we are. Going to show you a program that I use to color. It's amazing. It's a little bit of a hassle to get your footage from Premiere into this program, but it's totally worth it because the tools are really powerful. The algorithms that they use to color are just amazing, and it's great. So let's check it out. Davinci Resolve, you might have heard of it. The version 12 is out now. The cool thing about it, it's absolutely free. There's a paid version that comes with these sick controllers here. It's like $1,000. I don't know why. Well, I guess I know why people would buy it, because you get more tools. But the free version is just the same. The software is just the same, and it's awesome. So download it for free. It has an editor built in, and Davinci has been pushing really hard to kind of make the editor better. And so I think in version 14, 15, we're going to see huge improvements, and people are going to probably be editing solely with Davinci Resolve. For now, it's just a color thing for me. It's not worth editing in, but it does color so well. So download it, it's awesome. I'm just going to show you how to get your project from Premiere into Davinci Resolve. Let's quit Davinci Resolve. So that's it. Check it out. Let me just show you, this is a project I did for Christmas Eve. It's of our pastor talking about why you should come to the Christmas Eve service. So when you're in Premiere and you've got your project loaded, let's say you've got your project fully edited. I know you do a lot of one-take stuff with music, but if you need to edit, do it. Color should be last. Actually, I guess text should be last for some occasions, but sometimes I do text second to last and make sure the color is over the text as well. But editing should be locked down before you move into color, because if I were to change any of these in and out points of these clips after I color, well, then I have to go back in and recolor it, because when you color it, you export it out as a finished clip. And so you can't come back and add more, drag out the timeline. You can't do any of that. It's baked in. And so you'll have to do it over again. So try to color last. Using Premiere, getting over to Davinci is pretty simple. You go to File, you go to Export, and you go down to Final Cut Pro XML. We want an XML file. XMLs are really cool. They're just a document file that has ones and zeros in it, and it simply tells Davinci where to find the clips, which doesn't do that well because I always have to find them manually, but also the duration of each cut. So it like builds the edit. It understands where the clips are held, and then it rebuilds the edit in Davinci rather than us having to drag the clips in, create the edit ourselves in Davinci. It does it automatically. So let me just ret color XML. I'm going to save it to our desktop for this. It's exporting. It says, hey, please check that, blah, blah, blah. I never do. Quit Premiere. I usually quit just because I want all the power to go to Davinci for my computer, because it takes a bit of power. It loads up. It'll ask you to log in. Davinci's really cool about allowing multiple users, just in case you're working with a team. But usually it's just me here. Let me put my password in, log in. You see all my past projects here. I told you I do all my coloring in Davinci. Well, I can't say that. Sometimes I do it in Premiere if it's like a project that is simple or I just don't have the time. But and usually if I'm doing that, it's just like adding contrast. I usually don't touch the color in Premiere. So let's say I wanted to start a new project. So I go in here. You see Josh Brolin there. I'll show you a bit of why I have some of these Hollywood images in my video later. Start a new project, double click on Untitled Project. Then I'm going to have to load in that XML, import AAF, EDL, or an XML. I have an XML, I need to go find it. It's on my desktop, I remember. Brett Color XML. Usually I be a bit more organized, put it in the same folder where all my files are, and my project file and that. So I open it, it's going to tell what the parameters that it has found from the XML. It knows that it's 1920 by 1080, it knows the frame rate. I'm going to say okay. It's going to say, hey, clips weren't found yet. I don't know how to fix this, but every time I have to go in and manually tell it. It probably has something to do with, like, I'm not putting the XML in the same folder where all my raw footage is. I don't know, it's just not how I organize things. So this is a bit of a pain, but like I said, it's totally worth it to get through my project into Davinci Resolve. So going to Christmas Eve, Brett Visioncast, this is where I keep it. I have my footage all in a raw footage folder. I'm going to click OK. It's going to say, hey, some of these clips weren't found yet. That's probably exports that I've done from After Effects, like text or something, or audio files. I don't need any of that. I just need a couple clips to show you how I color. So I'm just going to say, do you want to select another folder? No, I don't. That's good enough. Look at all this stuff that it can't find. That's okay. It's listing off all these things that it can't find. I don't really care. Down here at the bottom of Davinci, you see this is kind of our workflow. If we go to media, it's showing you where the clips that it has found, showing you also where it can't find these clips. I'm going to delete that one. Yes, I want to remove it. Then I'm going to come in. Once you have your media clips here, I don't really touch much of them here. You have to go into edit, especially if you start a project within Davinci Resolve. You don't have to do the XML thing. You can just, if you wanted to color one single clip, you could just drag that single clip into your media window here. Okay, my computer crashed, so I'm back. Where was I? Okay, so we're back in here. This is the edit. Like I said, you don't have to drag in, or you don't have to use XML file. You can build it within Davinci Resolve. But when you call up the XML file, it already builds in the same edits that you had in Premiere, which is awesome. In my edit, I don't need this. I don't need these things. It's just going to slow me down, and plus I'm just showing you how to color. And so from edit, we'll move into color. This is where all the magic happens. It's pretty awesome. You got a lot of cool tools here, and I'm just going to take you through them here. So what you need to know, let's just go through the layout here. You've got, if I had more than one clip here, sometimes it would show up here depending on what gallery you have set up. Obviously your viewer. Davinci Resolve is a nodal based system, so it uses these nodes, which are really cool. The easiest way I can explain it is think of them as like a Photoshop layer. Now that's totally simplifying them, but they're like a Photoshop layer where they stack up on each other. You can put specific corrections, specific, if you want to change exposure or contrast, you can put them on different layers or nodes and then adjust them individually rather than just throwing everything on one layer and having to modify all of them together. We can do them individually, which is great. So down here we have our timeline. As you move through your edit, it will automatically select. It's a bit slow because I'm recording as well. So you have that. Then you have, what else do we have? We have color wheels down here, which is really awesome. Different sets of tools that we can use. Normally I only use these two here when I'm working with raw footage. So like from a Red Epic, Red Dragon, Arri Alexa, those kind of things. You can come in here and change a lot of the metadata that the raw image would have. But this was shot on a C100, I think. And so it just has the 8-bit color. So I don't really use any of those. I can't go in and change parameters afterwards anyway without really ruining stuff. So just going to work with these color wheels for now. You've got effects that I've never used, and RGB mixer, which can help at some point. But color wheels, this is what I normally work with. You have the wheels that affect color, and then down here you have exposure. You have lift, gamma, and gain, which basically are shadows, midtones, and highlights. Then you have offset, which is kind of like a grouping of all of them together. So it's going to change the overall image of everything. It's going to change highlights, shadows, and midtones when you change the luminance values of that or the color values. Right now these are primary wheels. We can come down, we have the primary bars, which I think you might have said you worked with in Premiere. They're good to pull out individual colors. And then you have log. The best way I can explain the difference between log and primary wheels. Primary wheels have more of a gradient between the shadows and the midtones. So you may say, well, I just want to change the shadow color into a purple. Oh, let's go back and get these things back to normal. I just want to change the shadows back to purple. Well, you can see I'm also changing the highlight colors. I'm changing the midtone colors. So in primary wheels, it has more of a gradient. Where if I come back in and I go to the log wheel, there's less of effect when I do my shadow change. Less of the midtones and highlights are being affected. You can see there's a lot less blue or purple there than when I did my primary wheel. If I go back to primary wheel and pull the purple, you're getting a huge more amount of purple in the midtones and in highlights. So specific reasons you would use those tools that will pop up. But I'm just kind of giving you an overview of what to expect here. In the middle here we have lots of different tools, which I'll go through some of these just so you can understand. You have your, within each tool you have different values. These tools will affect different things. So here you have hue versus hue. Hue versus saturation, hue versus luminance, luminance versus saturation, saturation versus saturation. What this is talking about is left and right versus up and down. So like luminance versus saturation. Here my luminance on the vertical lines, on the horizontal scale. The dark is on the left, highlights are on the right. My saturation is vertical here. So if I were to raise this point up, well, it's going to raise the saturation of my highlights. You can see it affect there. Or if I were to lower here, you can see it changes the saturation in my shadows. Obviously this is gradient, so if I wanted to just affect the shadows, I could make a little bar graph like that. We'll get into that in just a bit. And I'll talk more about some of these tools, but for now, let's just get moving. First thing I do when I start a project is I go to my nodes, I hold down, I'm on a Mac, I hold down Option and S and I click it a few times and I create more parallel nodes. Like I said, I'm simplifying the nodes into thinking that they're like layers. You can get into outside nodes where there's a node that's connected outside of this bridge. It's super complicated. I don't even know much about that. I have a lot to learn on it, but we can just get started with this. Normally I assign the nodes to the same thing for every project. Obviously different projects will need different tools used, but for the most part I keep them the same. So I don't always change the label, but just for this. First node I always do exposure. Second one is contrast. Third one I always add my color. Fourth one I usually do skin tone. Fifth one I just kind of leave. Sometimes I'll do a mask. My sixth one I'll show you in just a minute. Hello. You working for me? All right. Sixth one I will do shadow sat. I'll desaturate the shadows. Why didn't it work on all those? Okay, anyway. Color, skin tone, mask. Let's start with exposure. So I come in, first thing I always do is go to workspace. You see video scopes, I turn them on and you get this cool window here. You might be familiar with some of these tools, maybe not some of the others. Let me just show you what they are. So you have your scopes. The first one is waveform. Waveform's really cool in understanding exposure. My C100 has a waveform built into it so I can see the waveform live. You say, oh, it kind of looks like a histogram, but it's totally more powerful than that when working with video. So what it does is the high values in the 1023 here is my highlights. If I hit that line, it's pure clipping. So it's lost all its information and it's pure white. If I go down to 0, it's totally crushing the blacks, meaning I have no more information left in those blacks. You can see that I shot this in a happy medium. I have all the details in the shadows, I have all the details in the highlights, except for those three things. What's cool about the waveform is it lines up exactly with our image. So if we look, oh, we've got these three dots here that are pure white. Well, that's the bulbs there, right? I've got this kind of mid-tone brightness that's kind of in the center. It's not over on the left side of the image, over here. It's not over on the right side of the image. It's right in the middle. Oh, that's his face there. So we can see the levels of his face. I've got looks like a little bit of a red here on something about 1/3 into the way. Well, that's probably his hand or his shirt down here. I also have another one over here that's pretty bright. It's sitting in the mid-tone level, and that's his hand here. If you move the video, the waveform will change along with it. So you can see as he moves his hands, the waveform picks up on that and changes the luminance values. It's awesome. So I can go in and just know, oh, here's my hand. You can see RGB here. It's more red than green or blue. Same with his face. You can see the green outlined here. You can see the blue. It's way more red in his face than it is blue or green. And his other hand here as well. So that's my waveform. RGB Parade, I think you might have worked with this as well. I can see these are mini waveforms here. You can see his head here, hand here, head here, hand here, another hand here, and it's separated in RGB. I know that you had a problem with yours that it was way green cast. So let's just imagine that I'm going to cheat and just add this primary to green. You can see how it shifts. This green lifts up and the red and blue pull down when I do that. So it's saying it's more green. Now, let's just imagine that, let's do it on a different tool. So let's go into primary bars and just pump up the green here in my primary bar and make it a green cast. Now if I go back in my primary wheels, let's just say that I imported the image and it was naturally like this, similar to your situation on the images that you sent. If I wanted to correct for this, I can see that shadows are green, highlights are green, midtones are green. I can come in here on my offset and compensate that. Well, you can actually see, let's reset that. Primary bars. Oh, it's affecting both of those, isn't it? So it's affecting my primary wheels as well. Let's just say I'll leave that there and work with manually between the mids, shadows, and highlights. So if I want to remove green, the easiest way on my primary wheel is I find out where green is and I go the opposite direction. So I want to go into the purple or the blue. So I start moving, I'm looking at my midtones, and I see his skin kind of come back to life there. It's about right there, but I have a bit more of a green because I have it also in the shadows. I can start to move that a little bit, and I can move the highlights into that. Now it's way purple, but you get what I'm saying. I can fine tune this just to, oh, that looks really good in my highlights, and add a little green back so it's not too purple. So there, that's looking a bit more natural. It's a bit more red, and I can go in and manipulate those, but that's a simple way that you can affect your image to get it correct in Davinci Resolve. Now, I'm just going to take you through how I color an image, because I know you said you just want to beef up your game in coloring, and so I'll take you from start to finish with this image. So let's just reset everything. Let's get back to normal here. This is the image that I came in with, okay? Now, I work really hard, especially if I have time to set this up. I think I got there maybe an hour and a half before this setup. I wish I had a behind the scenes shot, but I had 2 lights pumping through a sheet. We call muslin, but it's basically like a bed sheet, just a piece of fabric that creates this one huge light source. And that's the only light I used on him. And so you don't see a rim light in the back. It's not like I had another light set up here. And because you have this huge source, this sheet, it's gonna wrap around the subject nicely. If I were just to have one hard light, you'd see this stronger shadow there. But because the source is so big, it allows that light to wrap around. So I didn't need to, actually no, I did. I put a board up here just outside of frame to bounce a bit more light. You can see a bit more light popping back in his face there. I put a board here to bounce some of the light that was shooting here, hits off this board and just fills in this side as well. Had nothing on the background, just turned these lights on for a bit more practical lighting, just to add some interest in the background. But because I had this huge soft source, it was spilling all over my background there. So I put up a black sheet to kind of block off this lighting in the back so that the background would be a bit darker. I think it's about 2 stops darker than he is, which is great, makes him pop, stand out a bit more. Why am I telling you all this? I work really hard to try and get the skin tones, the color, all of it correct in camera so that I don't have to work extra in post. Could I? Yeah, I could. Like I said, I'm not working with a high-end camera. It's got a low bit rate, and so I can't push the pixels that far without them breaking up. And so I don't want to do that. I want to try and get it as correct as I can so the image is clean as it can be when I export. And so try to get it great in camera. So there's not much I need to do to this image, but I'm going to show you what I would do, what I did do to make it right, and I'll push it a bit just so we have an example of how to color it best. So I'm in exposure. I come down here and I mess with my primary wheels. I've got primary wheels loaded up, shadows, midtones, and the highlights. I usually never mess with the offset unless it looks like it needs an overall bump in exposure, but I'll just come in and mess with the shadows. So I'll come in here. Oh, sorry, let me put on my video scopes. I always check my waveform to make sure that I'm not clipping. I love to have my shadows retain that information. I can come and crush them. Now there's no more information in this. And I don't like that. I like to just see a bit. So I'll raise that just off of the 0, just so I have a bit more information there. You can see the contrast. It pops. If I hold down Command and D, I can deselect this, and you can see how cool that is. It's just adding, and all I touched is shadows. Let's go into midtones. I think my midtones are great. This dotted line is typically where you want to have skin tones fall. With the C100, it usually looks better if you just push the skin tones a bit higher than that. The image looks a lot more clean. But I can come in here and just, really this is how I do it. I bounce around, I move it back and forth, and I just hit that kind of sweet spot. I push it too far and see what it looks like, move it too low, and I just find that sweet spot. Sometimes I'll land back on 0. I don't know. I'm just going by how it looks to my eye. Highlights, I usually pump up a little, and you can just see it just adds a lot more life. This piece that I shot was inviting people to come to this event, and so I wanted it to be warm. I didn't want it to be cold. I didn't want it to be dark. I wanted it to look inviting because that's the message of the video. Story is king. Even your color should reflect what story you're doing. So if you're shooting a guitarist playing a melancholy song, put some blues in there. Make the shadows dark. It doesn't have to be bright. The story and the color and the editing should all reflect, the editing and the color should all reflect what the story is. So I wanted this to be bright. I wanted him to stand out from the background. That's what we got going on here. Let's go to contrast. So I double click over here. I've got my exposure. It's affecting all of these other nodes. As you can see, when I deselect, all these other nodes are being affected by that. I'm going to add contrast. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to get rid of this waveform. I'm going to add a bit of nodes. Usually I don't mess too much with contrast. You can do contrast 2 ways here. You can do nice little S curves. You pump up the highlights, bring down the shadows a bit. It's a bit too crunchy for my taste, but we're just doing it for example here. Let's reset this. Let's get back to normal. You can also come down here and add this contrast here. Just a little slider. What's cool about this is you can change the pivot, so you can tell how much of the blacks that you want to recognize. And so you'll notice as I drag down the pivot, some of the midtones lose that contrast. See that? The midtones, his face, these lights, the wall back here, but the shadows still retain that contrast. You can see that. The shadows are still crunchy, but those highlights and midtones are losing some of that. I like to stick around 300 if I ever mess with the pivot. On a shoot like this, it's really simple. I won't mess with contrast and pivot too much. I usually just let that sit with the exposure. When I mess with exposure, I'm kind of adding a bit of that in. So make sure we're just adding contrast on our contrast node. That way if we ever want to come back and change something, we can. Let's go into color. Let's label that again. Colot. Color, this is where we get to fun stuff. This is where we create our look. It can be natural, it can be exaggerated, all depends on your story and what you want to tell, what kind of style you want to pull in. So I love doing with primary wheels, just because it has that soft gradient in between shadows and midtones and highlights. So you can do like a cool summer blockbuster action film where they always add the teals into the shadows and the yellows into the highlights. Been talking a while, I'm going to take a drink. So let's do that. Let's add some teal into the shadows. And you say, whoa, look at that. Looks very unnatural. Look, no shadows are really that blue. But you'll see because I'm working with primary wheels and there's that gradient, I can add some back. I can add the yellows into the skin tones, into the midtones, and you see it cools that off. It's not so blue anymore, and depending on how much you add, you can add some life into it. I was adding a bit too much yellow, so I'm going to bring it up a little into the reds. You can see it becomes a bit more natural. And so now we have this, a bit of a look. If I were to deselect this, you can see where we started, where we're at now. Just add some emotion to what we were working with. Now, one thing that I do, I always add it at the end of my nodes. I like to have, sorry, I thought someone was coming in. I like to have a natural looking shadow and a natural looking highlight. I don't like, it's just a telltale sign that you colored it, that you're going for an extreme look. Sometimes it's appropriate. Music videos might call for that, or a specific type of movie, a really stylized movie, but for this, I want it to look natural. So in reality, you wouldn't have that kind of look in the shadows. So what I do at the end of my nodes, I do what we call a luminance versus, I go to my luminance versus saturation, and I desaturate the shadows. So you notice if I pull this down, well, all of it goes saturated. You can see some color left in the highlights. But I want to pull all the saturation out of the shadows, but I want to keep it in the midtones. Since this is luminance versus saturation, the luminance is horizontal here. So I want to just kind of cut it off in the shadows. So I'm going to add another dot here and raise back up the saturation. Now we can see that our shadows are natural again. They're black. They're not that blue that kind of gives it that weird look. If I deselect this, you can see I really cut out a lot of that. Now, does that mean that my look is gone? No, still there. You can see where I added the blue. It's just not as extreme. It looks more natural. If I weren't doing this, you would think that looks normal. When I toggle between these two, you can see that there's definitely a look that I've added. I've got this kind of cold shadows, warm highlights. Might even add a bit more warmth to those highlights. Now we have this kind of cool contrast color. Shadows are blue, highlights are warm. He's got the same thing with his outfit. He's got a blue shirt on with these midtones, highlights as the warm skin tones. That's great. What next? We got our color. Oh, something you can do that some people do. Some people love to push the color way beyond what they like, what they know they're gonna want. And then what they do is they take down the saturation of this layer. So they go to key, which is our key here, and you go to our key output and you lower the gain, which is basically lowering the saturation of that node. And so it's only affecting our color, and we're kind of dialing back that amount that we want. Now, some people use it that way. When I first started, I would do that, and then I was just like, why don't I just get it right in when I do the initial color? Why do I have to push it so much? Some people may say, well, you need to do it because of something. I don't know why. but I don't want to take that extra step, so I'm just gonna, let me go back this way, kind of get back to normal. There we are. That's my look. Looks awesome. I love it. I'm happy with that. Let's move on to my skin tone. As I told you before, I like to get this right in camera, and so my skin tones aren't so bad. I like them. But I can show you how to manipulate the skin tones for yourself. We go down here to our qualifier. Qualifier is really cool. It's an eyedropper that'll pick up the specific colors of whatever you have underneath it. So let's say I just wanted to isolate the skin tones. What I'm going to do is click and drag over his face. And you can see in my node, it's got this kind of mask that it lays over. It's showing you what I've selected and what I haven't. The grayed out stuff is what I haven't. If you click this little wand here, it'll actually layer it over your window here so you can see it live. What do I do? If I click again, it's going to reset it. And so if I click, hold, and drag, you can see that I'm selecting the skin tone. I want all of this skin tone. Let's try the hand here. See if we get a better reading. Looks like I'm missing a little bit there. Let's try the face again. It's hard because his glasses are there. I want to make sure I get all of his skin tone. Okay, so it looks like his hands are all his skin in the shot is selected. Yeah, his eyeball isn't there and there's that dark shadow. I'm not too worried about that. But you can also see that I've got this background selected as well, which we do not want. We just want to affect the skin tone. Now I know that I will not be able to isolate the skin tone totally away from the background, but we're going to try our best. So let's take a look at it. Down here in the qualifier window, we have these parameters. We have hue, saturation, and luminance, and we have these selectors that have selected what's in between them as that's what the skin tone is reading. So within the hue, that's all our skin tone colors. Saturation, this is where our saturation of our skin tone is. Luminance, this is the value from darkest to lightest that our skin tone is. So we're going to come in and kind of narrow those results to try and knock out some of this background while keeping the skin tones as much as we can. So I'm gonna move the center of this slider so I get just so where I'm not losing too much of the skin tone. Now I'm going to narrow the width. You can see as I narrow it, I'm starting to lose a little bit on the nose. I don't want that. This might be as far as we can push the hue. Let's move on to saturation. The low end, let's raise it and see if we lose any skin tone. Oh, that looks great. I'm losing a bit more by his eye, but I'm okay with that because I'm knocking out so much of the background, which is great. Let's go to the highlights of this. Pull down. Oh yeah, you can see I lost a little bit of the background and then I start to lose his face. Now we can do the same thing with luminance. Pull in the low, pull in the high. Pull down the high here. You can see where I start to lose it. And look at that. We've eliminated a lot of the background. Like I said, not going to eliminate the whole background because it's obviously a very similar color and luminance value. So to be able to select it, if I really wanted to, I would just have to think in pre-production. I need the background color and brightness to look very different than a skin tone. But for this thing, I wanted it warm, so I like the wood, so I just deal with it. So now I have this selected. If I wanted to come in, let's take this mask off. It's still there. You can see the mask is still there. I just can't see it in my window. Now I can come in and change the luminance value of that skin tone. Now, yeah, the wood is being changed as well, but that's the best we can do. If I had a different color background, it would be just isolated on these skin tones. Again, you think of pre-production. Even if I wanted to change the color, if I wanted to add a bit more green into a skin tone, there it is. I can change the isolation of that as well. Now, it just doesn't have to do a skin tone. If I wanted to change the color of his shirt, I can do that. Let me select his shirt. Let me go back to my qualifier. Let me eliminate some of that. Widen that width. Check that luminance. Oh yeah. All right, eliminate a lot of that. Pull down the highs a bit. Okay. Is that good enough? Oh yeah. Okay. Can eliminate a lot of it. Now, if I wanted to change the shirt color, now obviously some of this background is still being affected, I can come in and change his shirt color. Notice his skin tones are not changing at all. Once again, I shot this with a weak camera, C100. Doesn't have a lot of color information. It's 8-bit, 420. And so the further I push those pixels in terms of color and luminance, saturation, the quicker they're going to deteriorate. So I want to make it minimal. But you can change things like this. This is just an example. I did a shot recently outside. I wanted the green to pop more in the grass, so I just highlighted the grass, boosted it up a bit, looked great. Next, oh, so cool. Okay, his face is too bright. Let's just imagine his face is too bright. I click on a new node here, and I want to create a mask on his face. So that's what I do. I come into my power window, selection. I can create different masks. I can draw my own with curvy lines or straight lines. I can make a box, or like let's say if I wanted to knock down the sky, like if I had a horizon shot and the sky was too bright, I would use a box. I don't want the box. Get rid of that box. Get out of here. Yeah, there's no keyframe selected. Okay, what the heck? Let's delete this node then. Yeah, you can tell I'm totally not versed in how to use this software, but you know, fake it till you make it. Okay, got this. I'm gonna click on a circle one. I'm gonna make his face more perfect. So just about this, can I do that in full screen? Let's pop up to full screen here. Just a little bit about this window. I've got my solid white line, which is the parameter of what I'm gonna affect. And then I have this pink outline here that also affects this line in the middle. That is my feather. So I like a lot of feather because I never want someone to know that I colored it. Usually when I go for a natural look, I never want someone to know that I brightened up a specific area. So if you don't have a feather, you're going to see a hard line between the dark and the light. I like to feather it a lot. Feather to taste, really. So I just want to select his face. I can change rotation with this little guy. That looks great to me. Let's go back. So I do full screen by Shift F. So you can pop in and out. I think there's a way to go even more full screen. Nope, that's not it. Go back. Okay. But usually Shift F is where I get into more details. So I've got that, and I want to change. What do I want to change? I want to change his brightness of his face. You say, well, why didn't you just change the brightness with your qualifier? Well, I had to select some of the background as well on that, and I didn't want to. So here's another option. I come in here and change the brightness of his face. Let's just make it really dark so we can see the change. With a mask, which is awesome, but this isn't a photo, it's video. So if I play it, that mask just sits there, and it just changes whatever is underneath that mask, and I don't want that. I want to only change his face. So what do? Well, we come to the next window and we have our tracker, and this is why Davinci is amazing. We can create a power window, a mask like this, and then we can track it, and it will track. And you see all those little cross points that it's tracking. It's not just moving left and right, it's also changing 3D, which is so powerful. Let's just stop that there. That's enough. Let's go back to the beginning. I started tracking in the middle of this clip, which is fine. It just means I have to, if I want to track before it, I have to hit the backwards and it'll track reverse. So you get the idea. Come on. Okay, so now look at that tracker. It just sticks right with it, and it only affects what's underneath the underneath the mask, which is sticking to his face. You can do that for hands. It gets a little tricky when it blurs like that. You'll start losing some tracking data, or if his hand goes off screen, it takes a lot of fiddling with. But for the most part, that's my power window. Let's deselect it so it looks normal again. and get off of that. Is that it? I think that's it. Sometimes you can come in and mess with blurs. If you wanted to add a blur this way or sharpen it, usually I do that. Usually I don't do a lot of sharpening, but you can if you want. Key, I already talked about. Sizing, never touched it. 3D, don't even know what it is. Data burn, who cares? I'll do that in Premiere if I need to add a time code or blah, blah, blah. This is basic. I've used a bit more in depth on this stuff. You can load in LUTs, and I could talk to you about false color, which I love. This is a third-party plugin that I downloaded that's free, that I can... this is the coolest tool for exposure. I have a monitor that I own that has false color built in, and it basically takes the exposure, the luminance value, and puts it on this scale here. So the brightest, no more information, clipped highlights is red. Purple is the absolute dark shadows, and then you have every color in between. Your skin tones you usually want to sit with the pink or the gray underneath it, which is what I've got going here. But that's all to taste. Sometimes you want it to be a bit more moody and you'd want it dark. False color is awesome. I love it. I don't even know why I'm telling you about it, just because I'm excited about it. But it's incredible. It's more powerful than a waveform because I can come in and see this specific line is sitting at this value, which is like middle gray. It's like the perfect middle exposure. And so one cool thing that I'll do sometimes, let me go back into my false color. I don't want to save that. One thing that I'll do is I'll pull clips from movies that I like. And let's go to here. Here are some, I love this shot from a video I watched on Vimeo, and I just screen cap. You can see the timeline from Vimeo. Oh, here's a classic shot from No Country for Old Men. Let's pull that in. I'm interested to know how in the world did Roger Deakins light this scene? Well, with false color, it's pretty easy. I can come in, put that there. I know the values that his skin tone is sitting at. I can see those. It's in between those right there. On the shadow side of his face, it's sitting way in the blacks. We've got these lamps that are clipping. The background is a bit darker than his skin tone. And so I can come in on set and set up my monitor, move my lights around until I get this kind of lighting, and I can match Hollywood stuff. And so I do that a lot when I'm thinking about a look. I've got a shoot in 2 weeks that I'm working on, and I'm working on a look for it and trying to find some values in it, my ratios from background to subject. So this is all done in Davinci. It's awesome. It's incredible. After I'm done with the project, you have to move over to this Deliver tab. Once I've colored it, I usually deliver it in an Apple ProRes, which is a high quality file. The video I shot before was shot with a C100, and ProRes is a way higher quality than that. So I'll export it as a ProRes file. Doesn't mean I'm increasing the quality. It just means that I'm not losing any. So I'll export it in something high quality like that. Have to browse, tell it where I want it to export to, blah, 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 find that. Then you have to add to render queue, and it will load it up in your render queue, and you start your render, and then you send it out, and it's awesome. Make sure you save your work. As always, that's just a quick rundown, not a quick one, but a long one, of Divinci Resolve. You should get it. There's no excuse. It's free. It's high quality and awesome. So check it out. Let me know what you think. If you have any more questions, just let me know. And I will talk to you soon, buddy. See you, man.